Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is time, Q&A time, July Q&A. We have a 3-part series this month for you. Obviously, this is part 1, and it looks like we have quite a few interesting questions to get through, so I'm pretty keen to get into it. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Hetzner. With hundreds of thousands of servers spread across several locations, Hetzner is one of the biggest European web hosts and data center operators. With their strong focus on sustainability, they offer high-performance dedicated servers in their server auction. There you can find different kinds of servers, even configured ones, at incredibly low prices without a setup fee or any minimum contract period. So you can save money while acting very sustainable. Hetzner offers a vast range of server products at fantastic prices, so for more information, please check the link in the video description. Interesting that the RTX 4060 Ti, so 16GB, uses the clamshell mode to reach, 16GB. I guess the 128-bit memory bus and current GDDR6 density means it had to. Could this sort of configuration become more common for future GPUs as a trade-off for limited memory bus width? Bus width for sure. Yeah, we just sort of talked about that. Yeah, I mean, they've used it in the past for sure. Lower-end GPUs in the past have used a clamshell configuration. Even in some examples, not for all of the memory chips, like 2 of them have done that to expand the capacity to a sort of odd number, like 6GB or something like that. So it's been used before. It'll be used again. I don't think it's, well, I don't know. I was going to say, I don't know if it's the most cost-effective way in the sense that what it does for performance as well, not just expanding capacity. Yeah. Obviously, if you get the bus width there, you get better scaling, better bandwidth, more capacity. You get all the things instead of just more capacity. So it's definitely a band-aid solution on these lower-end GPUs to ensure that, and when I say lower-end GPUs, a 4060 Ti is still pretty powerful. I mean, it's equivalent of almost an RTX 3070 or thereabouts, depending on the workload. Roughly an RTX 3070, and our opinion was that product should have had 16GB, and we're now like 2.5 years down the track and we're faced with the same problem. Band-aid solution, I reckon.
Yeah, I mean, if it comes down to 8 gig with no clamshell or 16 gig with a clamshell, I think we'd probably prefer the 16 gig design. It certainly makes a lot more sense, unless you're talking about a very low-end entry-level model where, NVIDIA has claimed that the clamshell design increased costs for the 4060 Ti PCB. To what level is questionable. I think it would be valid that it would increase cost somewhat because you have to think about the different board layers. Some of the memory chips are on the back side, some are on the front side. So yeah, it's not a simple design, but yeah, if we're talking about like a GT 4030, then maybe a clamshell design, you'd be like, okay, fair enough. You're selling that at $100. Don't do that maybe. But then certainly for a $400 and what we're now seeing a $500 GPU, I don't think the cost is an excuse at all. For $500, you should just be doing what is possible to make the card what it should be, which is a 16GB card, probably with better performance than what we got this generation. But nevertheless, that card should have 16 gigs. So yeah.
All right, given the very poor sales of the 40 series and AMD doing its absolute best to sink their own ship, do you predict more AIB partners are leaving the market? And if yes, who do you think could go next?
So I guess it's after the EVGA situation.
Yep.
Yeah, certainly a tough time to be a partner, especially if you're a partner that doesn't have other products going for you. So like an ASUS, Gigabyte, MSI, very unlikely they would exit the market because a lot of those companies have been expanding to other higher margin product lines, things like cases and coolers and things like that, where they're not sort of operating on a 5%, 10% sort of margin. So I'd imagine a lot of those companies are probably doing okay. But then you think about like a Zotac or a Sapphire or one of those brands, especially an AMD AIB, where AMD's market share is not amazing.
Yeah, it's rough.
You have to wonder, like, how's a Sapphire or Power Color doing at the moment? Like, I can't imagine that's a thrilling workplace at the moment where you really are relying on AMD to produce a compelling Radeon product. So yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think with EVGA being a primary NVIDIA partner, the relationship between NVIDIA and partners and AMD and partners is different. So maybe that would make it less likely for a Power Color to stop making products.
I mean, we have no insider idea on that. Hopefully no one has to fold, but...
No. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the other brands as well have sort of They have different things that they're sort of focusing on. You tend to see a lot of the PNYs and those sort of cards used in different markets. Like they're much more attractive products in Asian markets and those areas. So yeah, there's all sorts of different strengths there. But yeah, this can't have been a great time to be an AIB right now.
I think we've seen it a little bit, and we'll definitely see more of it, where you see those brands creating things like liquid coolers, cases, rebranding power supplies, things like that.
Yep.
To try and drop a bit more profit, a few more sales, those things they have to do.
Yeah. I saw you interact with Scattervault on Twitter a few days ago. Scattervault was saying he was worried about reviewing the 16GB RTX 4060 Ti because he didn't want to damage his relationship with NVIDIA. My question is, do you ever worry about damaging relationships with brutally honest reviews? Can't say that's something we do typically.
Yeah, we've never really cared. And this goes back well before Hardware Unboxed was a thing. And I guess we have to give some credit to like TechSpot as well, because I've always been free to just rip a product a new one if required. And TechSpot's they've never edited my words. They've never downplayed it. They've never said, oh, you can't say that. Or yeah, they've never really, I suppose it was a risk on my behalf as well, because I mean, before Hardware Unboxed, I was employed and still work freelance for techspot.com. And I guess, in a way, my job was sort of on the line, because if NVIDIA did decide not to sample me because I was saying mean things, then that would somewhat compromise my job, because I can't do my job for TechSpot. So then I would be in a position where I'd have to go buy the product, and we didn't quite have that sort of budget back then, because we didn't have things like Patreon and Floatplane and a big YouTube channel, so that would have made it more difficult. But yeah, NVIDIA was always pretty good back in the day. There was a few times where I remember I wrote an article about Ashes of the Singularity, and I think the DirectX 12 performance wasn't very good, and we sort of explained why. And NVIDIA wasn't too happy about that, but they never threatened to pull samples or anything like that. They always sort of copped it. So,
and that's the case with most companies. Like, yeah, negative reviews, it's not, companies will often get a bit angry about them. And, a very common thing would be the whole, we need a bit of clarity about what you've just said in your reviews. Can we ask a few additional questions? This will just be private, behind the scenes sort of emails or phone calls or things like that. So that's very common to get the we need a few more things from you. But as far as like going beyond that and sort of, we're never going to speak to you ever again type behavior, it's not really something we've experienced. Right. We've been pretty harsh to a lot of different companies. And again, like, our main philosophy is we're not at all reviewing products for companies. We're reviewing it for the consumer, you guys watching the videos. So we're coming at it from your perspective. So I guess while some of the things may upset like engineers, people who've worked on products, who have genuinely put a lot of time and effort into these things, if we're sort of thinking about those relationships and going, oh, this might upset a person or whatever, then it sort of takes away from thinking about what's best for the consumer and what's best for the viewer, because ultimately the viewers pay our bills. So,
yeah. So it's never a concern of ours. And I don't really think it should be a concern of anybody reviewing or testing computer hardware, because it just shouldn't be. You should go full steam ahead, give your honest opinion of the product. And that's that. You don't have to say what Gamers Next are saying or Hardware Unboxed is saying. You can put your own spin on it. You'd have to justify it pretty well, like what we do with data. But yeah, if you don't think it's a good product, then you definitely should say that. And yeah, as Tim said, generally speaking, companies like NVIDIA have been really good to work with. I know we had a silly little weird situation with them a few years ago, but for the decade before that, NVIDIA was a good company to work with. And really, I mean, I think I said this in one of my recent reviews, I definitely feel bad for the people at NVIDIA who are tasked with dealing with reviewers and getting positive feedback on products like the RTX 4060 Ti. Like that job can't be fun right now. And I know a lot of NVIDIA employees are passionate about PC tech, gaming and whatever. And I just think, man, imagine being in the position where you have to justify the existence of something like an RTX 4060 Ti.
It's certainly difficult. And I think that gets kind of lost in some of these discussions about like companies getting mad about reviews and things. almost everyone that I've ever interacted with at a company like NVIDIA has been super passionate about the technology and making games better. So, you know, some of these decisions that are made by companies on things like GPU pricing is one example. It's really not the same group of people that is developing the cards, developing the features, and is trying to do all that side of things. So you often run into these people who are like, you know, they're like DLSS, for example, they would be really passionate about, we think this is a really awesome technology, it's great. And they're not really thinking about how it's selling GPUs. They're just like, well, I've spent, you know, the last 5 years of my life working on this feature. And so they really want to get the message out about how it works and how well it improves the gaming experience. But then they're sort of hamstrung by other people in the company who are using it for other means, like to sell GPUs or to price GPUs in a different way. And that kind of takes away from the product some of the time. And so you do feel for those people when you meet them who, again, at NVIDIA, most people are very, very passionate about these products. And as you say, there's people who are tasked with, you know, they get the email or the document from higher up saying, this is what we're pricing it at. And they're like, oh,
they know.
Okay.
Yep.
And so they have to sort of think about it. And you can sometimes get the vibe of that when we're doing press briefings or something where they're kind of trying their best to sort of hype the product and sell it, and we're asking a few difficult questions and they're like, yeah, we understand that viewpoint. And it's like, it's difficult. So yeah, relationships with companies, you know, we don't want to, you know, jeopardize relationships for no reason, like sort of going after them for things that aren't true or haven't been backed up by data or something like that. We really want to make sure that everything we say is fair. But at the same time, our primary concern will always be viewers and consumers, the people that are watching this video and pay the bills, really.
All right, Tim, this is a sort of what-if question that we typically try to avoid, if I'm honest, but this was heavily upvoted, so damn you guys. Here we go. The question is, the future for budget gamers will probably be APUs from AMD. Okay, we can probably talk about that. What performance level would you guys like to see? And at what performance level would you even consider to benchmark those? Well, okay, so the first part is, do you think the future for budget gaming will be APUs? I know a lot of people have claimed this in the industry before. I strongly disagree. I know there's some evidence of that being the case, but we're talking about the PC platform here. So what do you think?
I think outside of like a Steam Deck or mobile platform where the low power consumption, the integrated nature makes sense, and it very much makes sense for like a Steam Deck. You wouldn't want a discrete GPU in that. Outside of that, you know, again, like as you say, everyone always is like, you know, the next generation of APUs will be faster, therefore they'll incentivize people into budget gaming, and that always ignores that the next generation of discrete GPUs is faster as well. So the gap is almost always maintained.
It's a flawed analysis, and it sort of reeks of a lack of experience. Look, I could be wrong. I could be made to look silly on this one, but I don't think anytime soon, if ever, the PC platform at the low end will be dominated by APUs because of reasons that we've seen time and time again, what Tim just said.
I mean, the size of APU that you'd need to make it a really compelling choice would be quite large.
So expensive.
So it would be expensive. You wouldn't be able to upgrade your CPU and GPU separately, which obviously lots of people do. So the upgrade path is less. The size of APU probably wouldn't fit into the AM5 socket. If you're talking about, like, maybe it would, depending on how big they go, but like questionable. And then obviously one of the main reasons why APUs will not take over anytime soon is their limited memory bandwidth. Unless we get a CPU generation which is beyond 64-bit dual channel memory support, like if it was 128-bit, 256-bit dual, which would be quite a significant upgrade. Because I think like Apple's integrated solution with their big beefy GPUs, I believe uses a 512-bit memory bus, which is significantly more memory than what you would see from current like x86 APUs. So unless we're seeing that, along with all those other constraints, it makes it hard to sort of say like it'll replace a budget GPU.
It's not practical for a whole heap of reasons, which Tim covered a lot of them. Comes down to price. You make an expensive, powerful APU that's impressive, and then you run into a situation which we've had with like the Zen 3 based APUs, where it's like, well, you're kind of getting to the point where you might as well just buy the non-APU version of that CPU, which generally has more like L3 cache and stuff because they haven't had to squeeze an iGPU in there. So you get a better CPU for less money, and then you can just buy at the time you could buy an entry-level discrete GPU that was faster for about the same money, if not maybe a little bit more money, but it was faster. So, and it was more practical. You got a better CPU, you got more flexibility on the GPU front. Just, again, it kind of goes against what the point of the PC platform is, to have all that flexibility and be able to mix and match CPUs and GPUs and different components. So, yeah, APUs are good for things like maybe home theater PCs, compact builds and that, but for gaming rigs, I think it's fair to say we're yet to see a scenario where APUs really make sense for a desktop gaming PC. So.
Yeah, and I guess part of it is impacted by the lack of gains that we've seen for low-end GPUs, discrete GPUs over time. So there is an opportunity for an APU to do something, but then if all the lower-end GPUs are horribly priced, then I doubt an APU would be any better in that region.
Even if an APU could skip a generation ahead, you use a future generation of GPU technology, it still wouldn't be that competitive.
I wouldn't have thought so.
Despite those benefits, the performance benefits, the power benefits. It's just, there's too many shortcomings there. Look, stuff like DDR5 will help push the APU forward, but as Tim says, we've already got multiple new generations of GPUs. So by the time we get an APU, it's going to be behind on that one anyway. But we'll see, I guess.
We'll see.
Is
the RTX 4060 Ti 16GB a bad/flawed product because of the 128-bit memory bus, for example, or is it just the price? If it was, say, $300 US, would you recommend it? I think for $300 for sure, you'd get a recommendation.
$300 would be a fantastic product, and probably that's where it sort of needs to be. I think I said that in my review. I think $350, pretty good product. $400 is like, it's a lot better than what we got. I wouldn't be super excited about it, but I mean, it'd be a lot better than it is. But I think $300 is where it would need to be to get me really excited and be recommending it constantly and sort of pushing you guys to go get it, because I think for a lot of you with slower GPUs, that would be a fantastic upgrade at that price point. Not too much above like what we were paying for a 6GB GTX 1060 back in the day. I think it's only like $60 maybe over that. And it's a much better product. So, good product. Is it flawed? Is it bad? No, I think I said that in some recent content, that it's not a bad product, as in it works. It's not flawed in any way because it does work. Scaling isn't as good as it could be if it had more memory bandwidth, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's flawed. It doesn't. It's not completely crippled and breaks down. It just doesn't scale as well as you'd expect it to. Still very playable at 1440p. It's just a bit disappointing that had it had more memory bandwidth, it'd be even better.
Yeah, I think it's not really like a 6500 XT type product where you say things like removing, the video encoder support is sort of like a critical flaw of the product that makes it hard to recommend. Limited
display outputs, extremely limited PCIe bus.
Yes.
I know people complain about the 8x bus, and sure, I think at $400-500 it probably should have the full 16 lanes, but x8 is generally fine even in a PCIe 3.0 system. A lot of you have been calling for me to do that testing, but there's not a lot to find there. Once you run out of VRAM, sure, it's worse, but once you run out of VRAM, it's bad anyway.
Game over anyway.
So that's not exactly a deal breaker, and the 16GB model will help with that. So not a flawed product. It's technically not a bad product. It's just poorly priced, which I think we've made clear in our review. $300, it'd get 2 thumbs up, not just the one. It'd be double thumbs up, must buy, great product, but sadly we missed the mark there by about $200 US. So,
it's a big miss, but that is what it is.
Yeah, it's almost twice the price that it should be, in our opinion. All right, we'll move on. All right, Tim, if you guys didn't have Hub or Mub, and Mub, where would you prefer to work, Mub? Would you go with a written review site, so like TechSpot, which I guess we're already doing, or would you go for another YouTube channel like Gamers Nexus? I mean, obviously it'd be very cool to go work with the Gamers Nexus guys, but there's kind of a lot of water between us, which makes that difficult. And you can't really do YouTube channel stuff like that remotely that well.
We have to move to the US if we were considering something like that.
Yeah.
I guess it comes down to like, if I'd never worked for a YouTube channel, I was just doing tech spot, what decision would I make as opposed to, let's say, if today Hardware Unboxed just collapsed instantly and I was sort of had to think of a job? I think having now done YouTube, I would far prefer to continue working for a YouTube channel.
Definitely.
So even if that's like more of a behind the scenes role, not being on camera, but just doing testing for videos and sort of thinking about video production and that sort of thing, I think I'd prefer that. But then if I'd never done it before, like would I just keep doing tech spot that I was doing at the time, or would I switch to YouTube? I'm not sure. But then again, I think, part of the reason that you started the channel and sort of made it what it is today is we sort of saw a little bit of the direction that written stuff was going and the opportunity that was there for a YouTube channel. So again, maybe that would have encouraged us to do something in that field.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Yeah. It's really hard to know how things will play out. But I mean, obviously I'd still be working for TechSpot. I'd be freelance writing for TechSpot and maybe doing a few other things on the side.
Yeah, be very different. Very different.
Be very different. But yeah, obviously we enjoy doing this sort of stuff. So we, in some capacity, be doing this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
With the difficulties with lower VRAM graphics cards that we see, how long do you think it will take to see that issue start to creep up to 12 and even 16GB cards? For example, can you buy a 4080 now and be confident that you'll have a great experience with it, or would you buy a 1700 XTX to be safe? So sort of, yeah, the whole future-proofing yourself with VRAM. I think 12 gigabytes I'm not that sure about. So I guess what's put us, dare I say, almost at the forefront of this whole VRAM conversation, because obviously we've done a lot of content, we've talked about it at length now. But back when I reviewed the RTX 3070, I can't remember exactly what I said, but I said, look, seems like a pretty good value product at $500, getting some great features, nice performance uplift over the previous generation. My only concern with this product, and probably the reason why I wouldn't buy it, and this is what I said about the RTX 3070 in my day one review, is because it only has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. I'd like to see more VRAM at this price point, at this point in time. Then we reviewed the the RX 6800, and it had 16 gigabytes. I said, yeah, this is what I'd sort of expect out of an RTX 3070. Given that these, obviously the 6800 was a bit more expensive, but it had the rasterization performance to back up that price increase. So price to performance, they were pretty similar in that sense, but twice as much VRAM. I predicted that the 6800 would age better, given that we had next generation consoles and that landscape was shifting. So that was pretty much my initial push towards more VRAM on graphics cards, and that's turned out to be probably a pretty wise call, given how things have played out, and I expect that they will continue to. But I think 12 gigabytes for, what would you say, like a 4060 Ti class product, that should be the minimum, because that's a pretty powerful GPU. And again, the whole how much VRAM do you need? Realistically, all GPUs, all current generation GPUs should have a minimum of 16, because you can use ultra quality textures regardless of how powerful the GPU is, and that gives you a really good visual improvement. So mark my words, a year from now, definitely 2 years from now, there'll be plenty of games that use 16 gigabyte VRAM buffers, somewhere in the 13 gigabytes to 16 gigabyte range, and they will look a lot better doing that. So if you had like a crappy GPU, like a 6500 XT with 16 gigabytes, you could just max out the textures and it would look really good. You might only be playing at like 40 frames per second on medium quality settings, but with those high quality textures, it would make the presentation look a lot better than it would otherwise on low or medium. So that's the advantage of the VRAM. The VRAM's, again, it's a hard conversation, because how much VRAM you should put on a product is really heavily determined by the price of the product, which generally then determines the performance of the product. But typically speaking, like the lowest quality textures, the highest quality textures has a very minimal impact on FPS performance. So it's kind of one of those things where it'd be nice to be able to just use maximum quality textures on everything, but you've got to be realistic about how much VRAM and the memory bus and all that stuff you have on the lower end products.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be expecting like an entry-level low-tier card is probably going to deliver lower-tier visual quality. Like that's fair, and that's why I've sort of said that in a sort of $100 range, 8 gigabytes would still be appropriate, because it depends, obviously.
Yeah, like I mean, for this generation, look, I could probably go as high as anything under $300. I'm pretty well okay with only 8 gigabytes. So if above $300 should have 12 gigabytes, $400 and above should be 16. And then beyond that, not too phased. So I think for this next generation and the next few generations of GPUs, you're not going to need more than 16 gigabytes, sort of like what we saw with 8 gigabytes being sufficient for a very long time, from like, way as far back as GTX 1070. I think it was 7 years ago now, something like that.
Yeah.
So from Pascal to about 2 years ago, I think 8 gigabytes was okay. But yeah, from probably the GeForce 30 series, because there's been a lot of games released like Halo and stuff like that that play at really high frame rates using ultra quality settings, but they don't have enough VRAM to load all the textures in. I don't know, like a lot of you guys have been complaining about this. I mentioned it originally when the 3070 was launched, but I didn't really investigate and look into it until much more recently. And a lot of you have been complaining to me over the last few years that there's been games you've been playing and you've been having texture problems, or the game started stuttering after 40 minutes of gameplay because you ran out of VRAM. So it's been a problem for a while now. It's not just, a lot of people like to try and say it's these unoptimized games like, if it wasn't for The Last of Us Part 1, this wouldn't be a problem. It's like, no, that's actually very wrong. It's been a problem for a while now. It's just that it's hard to test for. It requires a lot of in-depth testing that reviewers don't necessarily do on an individual GPU. You really have to be specifically looking for that problem. But yeah, to answer your question, I don't think you have to go too crazy with the VRAM thing. It's no different to how it's been in the past. There's just games are starting to call for a certain amount of VRAM, and I really think 16 gigabytes is going to be that sweet spot moving forward over the next few years. And I don't know how many years, but it's probably going to be quite a few years before you can justify going beyond that, like what we're seeing now from 8 to 16.
Yeah, I think 16 gig now is going to last you until the next upgrade that you'd be considering, which is probably not the next generation, but the generation after. So probably around that 4 to 5 year range, I would expect. But I mean, with something like 12 gigabytes, is like, that should enable in a lot of situations not the low quality setting textures. It's going to enable somewhere in the middle. So it's just, you're going to have to think about how acceptable is that to you. Like, are you going to be okay with some games running on ultra, but some being medium or high quality textures as opposed to the very top level? I think it's unlikely that 12 gigabytes will be like the bottom of the barrel, like super low quality textures anytime soon, whereas 8 gigabytes seems to be heading that way. So 12 gigabytes is like, you're making a compromise there. It's sort of like,
it's a bit too. So the RTX 4070 is a product that I don't mind. It's one of the better GPUs in my opinion from the 40 series. So, but then you've got the 4070 Ti at $800, and I think that's way too much to pay for a card with 12 gigabytes. Again, it'll be serviceable, like Tim's saying, but I think when we get a few years down the track, you'll probably wish you had 16 gigabytes because you don't want to be managing your VRAM. You don't want to be losing performance because you don't have enough VRAM. You want that VRAM to be a thing you don't worry about. It complicates the whole process. Like we've seen, like with the RTX 4060 Ti, it's kind of crazy to see games like Resident Evil 4, The Last of Us Part 1. What else there's a heap of other games in there, maybe Hogwarts, but there's a few other games in there and they play so well in the 16 gigabyte card. Like you get 100 FPS in, Resident Evil 4, and then the frame rate's all over the map with the 8 gigabyte version because you're having to, shuffle assets and it's running out of VRAM and having to manage that, and that occasionally introduces stuttering. There's just a whole heap of problems that can arise when not having enough VRAM.
You want I think with this aging thing, you want the VRAM capacity to age with the card. So if you're buying a card now and it's giving you ultra settings type experience, then sure, in 5 years, probably not going to be an ultra level card anymore. It's going to be medium. But you don't want to then have it go from ultra to medium quality settings generally, but then textures go down to low. And what we're seeing today is that there's games where you can use them at ultra settings, but with 8 gigabytes, you're sort of looking at medium to low quite quickly. So there could be games very shortly where otherwise you would see the ultra level performance, but with low level textures. So with 12 gigabytes, there is a chance that it's going to age a little bit better in terms of that card is going to be ultra now, and then maybe in a few years it's going to be high with high textures and then medium with medium textures. That would be graceful aging, but there's still a risk that towards the back end of that card's life that it may be a bit lower than that. Whereas I think with 16 gig, very much the level of performance you're getting from those cards is typically ultra level, and it's very likely to be ultra level textures throughout the lifespan of the cards. It's sort of like, it's better than gracefully aging. It's like, yes, the performance is going to dip down over the years, and a 4080 is going to be more of a mid-tier card in 4-5 years in performance, but then hopefully that VRAM, is giving you that ultra settings textures for quite a while. So again, sort of that balance. I think 12 gig is, as you say, for a 3070, it's a mid-range, even though people cringe at $600 being mid-range, but it's mid to high end. You're using it with ultra now. It's probably going to be gracefully aging to high and medium with a texture quality reduction over time, but hopefully far enough in the future.
Yeah, I think with this current generation, we're at the start of 16 gigabytes, sort of being what you would want to have moving forward. And we're well and truly at the end of 8 gigabytes being sufficient for high-end gaming, even at 1080p. That's really where we are. And we've sort of been making that transition over the last few years. And while some people argue that, we're not there yet, I think we are. That, in my opinion, we are. And you're going to see just more of that over the next 2 years. So I would not be buying an 8 gigabyte RTX 4060 Ti. That is going to be the absolute... apart from the fact that it's a bad value, not good product that is worse than the 3060 Ti in a number of rasterization titles, apart from the fact that it's a really bad product, the 8 gigabyte version's horrifically bad, terrible investment. It's going to age terribly, while the 16 gigabyte version should not be purchased at $100 US premium and is also a terrible product at $500. If I had the option of having to buy one of those products, a $400 8 gigabyte card or a $500 16 gigabyte card, as much as it would suck, I'd buy the $500 card because it's just going to be a much better product now and in the future. Again, most of the games that we have available right now do not require more than 8 gigabytes, especially with reasonable quality settings. And you can play pretty much all games on an 8 gigabyte card. Again, stuff like Halo, you can dial that down and get it, You shouldn't need to dial it down because the frame rate's already really high on Ultra, but you can make it work. But I think 2 years from now, you're going to be regretting saving the $100 US. But ultimately, you probably shouldn't buy either. You should probably look at something like an Radeon RX 6800 XT, something along those lines.
Used GPUs.
Oh, yeah.
You can get a used 2080 Ti for less than...
Wow, yeah. Used 2080 Ti is a much better product. So anyway, there are options out there. 4060 Ti is definitely not it. Have we answered this one?
Yep.
6 times? 6 different ways? Cool.
Yep.
We'll move on. Could you guys maybe, we'll maybe think about it, do a refresh video on the 7900 GPUs to see if performance has gotten better with new drivers and how the new pricing stacks up against competing NVIDIA cards. So I actually am in the process of doing sort of a re-review, I suppose you would call it, of the Radeon RX 7900 XT. So not the XTX just yet, but the XT version. Because we have seen that down around $700 on sale and pretty reliably at about $750, which seems to be a really good price for that card, given that it started at $900, which was awful. I absolutely destroyed the 7900 XT in my review. Pretty much mocked it for being an absolutely laughably bad value card. Seems like it's pretty decent now at $750, so I will re-review that one for you, and hopefully you'll see that on the channel in the next few weeks. Within the next 2 weeks, I plan to have that content done for you. And then we'll go from there. All right, Tim, with the release of the 4060 Ti 16GB, we don't have any officially announced GPUs from either vendor to look forward to, so I didn't prompt you to do that. What do you think the lineup will look like through the rest of the year? AMD especially has a huge gap between the 7600 and 1700 XTX, but one would think AMD would at least announce something for people in the $300 to $700 range.
Yeah, it does sound like AMD's preparing a couple of different models, an RX 7700, RX 7800, and even there's been rumors of like an RX 7900 GRE or something weird there. It's like a cut down version of an XT, which is just a terrible name.
It's like the golden, I'm going to say like rabbit edition or something.
I don't know.
It's a Chinese only version, I believe.
Yeah, not sure what's going on there.
I think it's got a cut down memory bus, 16 gigs of VRAM.
Yeah,
Anyway.
not sure. Haven't looked into it too much because we don't really talk about rumors too much, but definitely 7700 and 7800 products are very likely to be released in that price range as you're talking about.
Probably September.
Probably priced in that range. Not expecting like huge performance uplifts over existing products, especially because AMD has continued to... Yeah.
It'll be very yawn-worthy.
Yeah, they've continued to cut prices on like a 6800 XT and stuff, so if we're looking at current market versus new product, not expecting like massive gains there, but they're producing these cards, so they've got to release them at some point. And again, these companies have been significantly hamstrung by the amount of supply that they've produced for these cards. AMD would not be waiting this long if they had no 6800 XTs left and they were able to just easily push them out the door. They've been trying very hard to get people to buy them and push them out so they can make those products enter the market with, so they don't have to compete with themselves, but they just haven't been super successful at that. So I would expect those products to come out. An RTX 4050 has been rumored as well with astonishingly, just 6 gigabytes of VRAM. So hopefully that card gets cancelled because it will be absolutely terrible. But
if it's $100.
Well, if it's $100, I mean, come on, it's not going to be $100. There's no way.
I'm calling it out. It'll be $100.
No way. It'll be $250 or something like that.
I'll go $130.
Yeah, maybe. But no, it sounds like that card is, again, a possibility.
Yeah.
Maybe they just will never release it because I can't imagine it will perform well in sales or anything. And yeah, there's obviously room for an AMD product as well in that range. Now, they did call it a 7600 non-XT, so they're not...
Oh, God.
They're not really saying we're going to cut down the 7600 further, but they can make a 7500 XT and not make it the terrible product that it was the previous time around.
Yeah. No, I reckon to make that product good, so the 7500 XT, you'd want to cut the PCIe lanes in half again. I reckon 1 or 2 display outputs.
I think gamers only need 1.
Yeah, just go for 1, save some money there. And it can be like a Russian roulette type thing between HDMI and DisplayPort, so you just don't know what you're getting there.
Yeah.
It might even come, there might be no display ports. No sort of hardware encoding engine.
Don't need that.
Yeah, gamers hate those. And then, probably just 4 gigs of VRAM, I reckon. And then later on, they can offer a clamshell 16 gigabyte version for twice the price. So that's something to look forward to. So there you go. There are some exciting things coming up potentially.
Yeah.
That leak you've heard here for the first time.
I would laugh if all those predictions come true, because if it uses a Navi 34, there's every chance that all those issues will be there again, especially if it's like more of a refresh. But
surely they wouldn't dare do that again.
Oh, surely not. I mean,
it is AMD though.
NVIDIA's lineup is so spaced out. The top end, there is room for TI models as well. 4080 Ti, 4090 Ti, all possible because the 4090 doesn't use the full die. 4080 Ti, you could price it $1,400 or drop the 4080 to $1,000 and launch it at $1,200. I'm not sure. But there's obviously room there for products. So we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I wouldn't be, none of these products are like, I'm going to be super excited about it.
No, none of them are like, I love my job.
I think the only thing that would get me really excited would be if a 7800 XT had 16 gig of VRAM and was priced at $300 to $400, which just won't happen. But if it was, that would be like if they had the 7700 at $350 and the 7800 at $400. That could be interesting, but it's just not going to happen. So
that's what they should do.
That would get people talking. But yeah, so exciting is probably pushing it a bit much for what we're going to see throughout the rest of this generation.
Yeah. All right, Tim's been forced to pick another sort of crystal ball, what if it depends type question, because you guys heavily upvoted this one, so thanks for that. If you had to guess, how long do you think until the GPU market becomes more favourable to the consumer? If you had to guess. I think we have to guess because of your question.
We have to, yep.
We have to guess. Mainly the improvement of the price to performance between generations and a stronger low-end segment. So we absolutely do have to guess on this one because we haven't seen what the future will bring. And yeah, we have to guess as to how long.
I mean, the absolute earliest I could see this would be like late 2024, 2025 with another generation. Like it's not going to happen this gen. So it'll be like what happens with the next generation in terms of like we get a big uplift. Maybe, you know, the TikTok thing that sort of seems to be happening lately. Maybe the next generation will be good. But I mean, we're not talking anytime soon. We're not talking like by Christmas this year, you'll all be rocking really affordable GPUs. Like, there's no chance of that.
As this video goes live, AMD and NVIDIA are going to simultaneously announce 40% price cuts to the current generation.
Well, I'd love to be proved wrong if that's the case, but yeah, don't know. That's probably never going to happen.
Yeah, your best hope is in the next generation being sort of, as I've called it before, this is more the features type generation where they try to sell you on stuff like, you know, frame generation. And then the next generation will be your cost per frame, your price to performance type generation, like what we saw with the GeForce 30 series and the GeForce 10 series. So it's like that, almost like what I've talked about, like the TikTok type cycle that Intel used to do that NVIDIA has adopted. That's our best hope. Beyond that, who knows? But obviously there's other factors that influence this heavily, like the AI boom and whatever else is going to come along to screw over gamers next. We don't know. Okay, going to hit pause there on part one. As I said, there were quite a few interesting questions there. Good discussion between Tim and myself, I think. And we have more to come. So make sure you are subscribed for that, because part two will be up on the channel, probably not tomorrow, the night after, and there'll be a part three. So plenty more question answering for the month of July. And then we'll do it next month and the month after that, because we've been doing this Q&A series for years now.
It's awesome. I love doing it.
I always look forward to it.
Up. Yeah.
At the end of the month. Yep. So thank you everyone who did ask a question. Thank you to those of you who upvoted the questions you were interested in. And yeah, it's going to do it. So I guess thank you for watching. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.